Since 2019, more and more of us are working from home full time, but companies are trying very hard to get employees back in an office. And if you've read the debates on social media about this topic, you've probably seen some passionate arguments. Each side thinks the other is wrong, each side is unwilling to acknowledge the realities of the other. Whether you're an employee or a leader, the promise I'm going to make to you in this channel is that I'm always going to tell you what I think you need to hear, not necessarily what you may want to hear. That sometimes means I end up pissing off both sides, but we usually end up with better outcomes in the end. So, in honor of that promise, we're going to tackle this contentious topic of remote work in 3 parts. In part 1, I'm going to summarize the issue and take a crack at explaining why I think the 2 sides of this argument are not seeing eye to eye. I want to start the conversation about what everyone involved is gaining and losing with remote work. In part 2, we're going to dive into video calls, how they mess with our brains, why we get Zoom fatigue, and what we can do to try to fix things. In part 3, I'm going to suggest some ways that companies and employees can navigate this issue with thoughts about what it would be like to reimagine a company built for remote working versus trying to bolt it on to the way we used to do things. If you're ready, put on your onesie, sit down in your home office, pet the dog, and let's figure this out together. Let's start this series by talking about our motives and how they will contaminate this discussion. Employees and employers are in a relationship that is in trouble. Relationships that are in trouble tend to leave one or both sides in one of 3 stages of motives. When there is an initial disagreement with an otherwise functional relationship, both sides want a win-win. In other words, they want their own side to get a win, but they also want the other side to get a win. And negotiations are always more successful when each side wants the other to win also. I call this the win-win or no deal stage. If things are starting to turn a bit more sour or trust is low, we want our side to win, and we no longer care if the other side wins. If they get a win, fine, but it's not important to us that they do. I want a win, okay? And I call this the win-meh stage. In the final stages, resentment takes over, and each side no longer wants to just win. They want the other side to lose. It's no longer good enough that we get what we want. The other side has to suffer. This is the win-lose or no deal stage, and it's at this stage when it's nearly impossible to negotiate. Some of the most heated debates that I've seen on the topic of remote work are from people in this final stage on both sides. On the employee side, these are people so disengaged at their companies that they're in full retaliation mode. They're milking their jobs. They're doing as little work as possible. The working from home acts like a camouflage at this point, shielding their employer from being able to see what they're doing or not doing. On the employer side, this looks a lot like, I'm the boss, that's why. If you want a job here, you better be sitting in a seat that I can see from my corner office because I don't trust you. And if you're going to work remotely, you're going to have to install this spyware on your computer that makes sure you're actually working. Managers in this state have deep trust issues, so they think that unless they're able to pop up unannounced behind employees, those employees will be goofing off. If you're at either of these extreme positions, this video series is not for you. You won't be interested in what I have to say because you'll see that I'm focused on trying to make sure both sides get a win. If that's you, I'm just going to give you a second right now to go find a puppy video or something. Okay, if you're still watching, I will assume that you were at least in the middle stage. You want to win, and you won't mind if the other side gets a win too. On to the next challenge with the conversation. The benefits that each side realizes from getting their way are very tangible, and the downsides are very ethereal. This works against us. I like to compare this to cigarette smoking or vaping. People do it because the benefits of doing it are immediate and the long-term negative consequences of it seem so far off in the distance as to be unimportant. Remote working is so popular right now that when I point out some of the downsides of it, I feel a bit like someone in the mid-1960s trying to teach smokers about lung cancer. It's a rough job and a tough sell, but stick with me, okay? For employees, the economic benefits of working remotely are usually very large. For parents of small children, it can be life-changing money. These benefits come most often in the form of money saved, but sometimes employees can earn higher income too by being able to compete in markets where the pay is higher without moving to a more expensive area to get it. This double combo of higher savings and higher income are so compelling that employees are just not willing to give them up, especially since wages have not kept up with the cost of living, nor have they remained proportionate to corporate profits in some areas. After school care can cost families between $500 and $800 per month per child. So working from home can be like getting a $10,000 to $20,000 a year raise for some. And we haven't even mentioned the cost of commuting, which can tack on another $12,000 per year. So for employees, the economic benefit of remote work is so large that it can compel them to want to work remotely, even if they would have preferred to be in the office. In other words, even if working remotely negatively impacted them in other big ways, they'd still choose remote work. Now, what I'll be proposing in part 3 will absolutely allow you to continue to work remotely a majority of the time, 92% to be exact. But we make better decisions when we have more information. And by the end of this series, I want everyone to have a much clearer understanding of the trade-offs we're making when we're deciding to take a remote position. Some are psychological impacts, and some are logistical. Some are fantastically positive, and some are quite bad. On the employer's side of the argument, most of the reasons for wanting people back in the office seem to revolve around culture, collaboration, and innovation. The more unhealthy reasons I've seen are lack of control and wanting things to be the way they were before because that's what was comfortable before. I'm not even going to address the lack of control thing beyond pointing out that it's an unhealthy leadership behavior rooted in lack of trust. If a majority of your employees would actually goof off when out of your sight, the seeds that planted that behavior were sown long before the pandemic or remote working. As we will continue to discuss repeatedly on this channel, motivated outcomes come from employees who are inherently aligned with the company's goals and their just cause in the world. They don't goof off because they don't want to goof off, not because they think you're watching or will get caught. Leaders who think the only way to get outcomes is to give commands and control people are going to be very uncomfortable with remote work. I don't think that discomfort should fall on the shoulders of employees. It's a leadership problem that's outside the scope of this video series about remote work, but it's certainly not outside the scope of this channel, so stay tuned for videos to help with leadership control and trust issues. The loss of culture, collaboration, and innovation are valid concerns, and there is some real data to back that up. But I must confess, they seem empty coming from companies that have been outsourcing work to different continents for years. Remote work negatively impacts company culture and team collaboration for exactly the same reasons that outsourcing does. So, leaders, if you've got strong opinions about protecting culture and improving collaboration, I'm also expecting you to be against splitting teams across continents or outsourcing teams offshore that have to coordinate with teams onshore, right? Because remote work is remote work, whether it was your decision to hire a team offshore or the team's decision to work from their guest bedroom. Culture is a tricky one because it means different things to different people. My definition includes people's connection to the just cause of the company, whether that's the founder's story or just a positive impact to society. Norms at the company for performance, quality, and communication. Traditions or rituals. The way decisions are made, and whether it's safe to fail or not. Every company has a culture. It's just that some are carefully crafted and cared for by leaders at the company, and some are happenstance outcomes of office politics and toxic leadership. So as a leader, before you bemoan the loss of culture with remote work, make sure you know which type your company has. I've worked with many leaders who told me they were proud of their culture, only to discover the employees think it's toxic as hell. I mean, if you've hired or promoted a bunch of toxic leaders in your organization, your employees running into them less frequently because they're working remotely is an improvement for your culture as far as they're concerned. Companies that were good at cultivating strong cultures in person will likely be good at finding creative ways to do that remotely. And honestly, there's probably not much of a substitute to pulling everyone together in person once a year or doing executive roadshows for employees in various parts of the country to keep the culture alive. And by the way, being an organization that respects autonomy and enables employees to work from wherever they want is also a culture worth being proud of, right? Now, let's talk about communication and collaboration. The data does show that while individual productivity can go up with remote work, team performance tends to go down, especially the interactions between different teams. The further we move away from our own teams on the org chart, the greater the negative impact to collaboration because incidental communication nearly evaporates. Have you ever been in a conference room or been walking through the cafeteria at work and seen a coworker from a different team and it reminded you to ask them a question or set up a chat with them? These interactions and a million more just like them don't happen when employees are all remote. We also lose track of who we need to contact for what. When COVID first hit, many teams who had been working together in person suddenly went all remote. And that was okay because we were leveraging the connection we'd built with our coworkers in person, and our mental maps of the org charts came with us. But over the years, companies have had numerous reorgs and layoffs. New people have joined, and now we have quite a few teams, perhaps a majority of them, where none of the team members have met in person ever. Our mental maps of the org chart are now so outdated that they're nearly useless. It's nearly impossible, especially for new employees, to even know about other teams that might be able to help them, never mind have relationships with those teams they can leverage to get that help. This is creating ever-deepening silos in our organizations. The larger your company, the more those silos are impacting the speed of the system these teams are operating inside of. Basically, companies spent years building these interconnected but huge organizations that required synchronization and coordination to run smoothly. And remote work has tended to blow the components of these systems into all the employees' guest bedrooms. We'll discuss this more in part 3, but if you're going to operate primarily remotely, we're going to want to rethink the designs of these systems and the overdependence on coordination to make them work well. Now, up to now, we've been describing this loss of collaboration as mostly a negative for companies, but I want to make the case that it's also bad for employees. Assuming you have a motivation to succeed at your job and perhaps even aspirations for career growth, you are being harmed by this lack of collaboration. Much of what studies are showing us is that incidental and peripheral communication are way down when employees work remotely. You just aren't benefiting from the information flowing around you that isn't directly occurring in the virtual meetings that you're a part of. Whereas in the office, you may have overheard two coworkers seem confused about something and you had an answer about it. Now your coworkers are deprived of your answer and you don't even know there was a question. Everyone's having to seek out this information in other ways, Slack and email, for example, which is time-consuming and rarely paints the full picture. Nowadays, we get on our Zoom meetings, they have an agenda, we tackle the agenda, and we're out. We don't connect with people personally while they're coming into the conference room, and we aren't walking together to the next meeting. These missing interactions matter for your career. It's more difficult for your work to be noticed. If you're just starting out in your career, it's hard to find mentors who can help you make connections and advance your skills. You're simply building fewer of the relationships that help you be successful, recognized, and promoted. These interactions matter to us as human beings also. A 9-year study of 7,000 men and women found that people who were disconnected from others were roughly 3 times more likely to die during the 9 years of the study than people with strong social ties. And get this, even people with unhealthy lifestyles but strong social ties outlive those with healthy lifestyles but who had poor social connections. Social connections are perhaps even more important to your longevity than diet and exercise. Now, I'm not suggesting that we all need to be best friends at work, but would it be a bad thing to have friends at work? For my book, I interviewed a Gen Z employee who said to me, "I don't go to work to make friends. I have friends already. I go to work to make money." He was forgetting that he made most of his current friends in high school and college, where he had direct contact with other humans who were being forced into the same physical space. You know, like the office. I remember those days in my 20s. New friends seemed to just grow on trees. And then one after another, they got married, had kids, and moved out of state. Hell, I even moved out of state once. And then almost overnight, it seems, I found myself with fewer friends and fewer opportunities to make them. As someone in my 50s now, most of the friends in my life are those who I've worked with at previous companies, who I've kept in touch with and occasionally grab a meal or coffee with. Since the pandemic and my nearly 100% remote work situation, the tap for new friends has been virtually shut off, and I know I'm not the only one. So, whether you're friends with your coworkers or are just friendly with them, your mental health will benefit from that. I can read some of your minds right now. You're saying, Sean, I get everything I need from video conferencing calls. I can see everyone, they can see me, we interact. I can do just as well with video calls as I can in person. And I agree that it's very close. But neurologically speaking, there are 5 big impacts from video calls. These impacts have reverberating effects on our performance, our energy, and our connectedness at work. We need to be aware of them and adapt accordingly. We'll address this and more in part 2 of this series. If you found this helpful, forward it to your leader from an anonymous email account, and be sure to subscribe and like the video so you don't miss the rest of this series, as well as a lot more content in the pipeline. Thanks for watching.